What do you do when the road your ancestors walked for 14 centuries simply vanishes overnight? For over 1,000 years, a specific geography in northern India relied on a singular, lethal biological clock. When the mercury hit -40, the Zanskar River stopped being a torrent and became a bridge. The locals call it the Chadar. It means a shroud, a burial cloth. This ice was the only umbilical cord connecting 14,000 people to the rest of the sentient world. It was how children reached schools. It was how the sick reached surgeons. It was the only way in and the only way out. But this winter, the clock stopped. For the first time in recorded history, the bone-white ice failed to form. In its place, a violent, turquoise current cut through the gorge, mocking the people who waited on the banks for a highway that never arrived. Official climate reports call this an anomaly. The tourism boards call it a seasonal shift. We are here because both of those narratives are a lie. The ice did not just melt, it was executed. While the world was told that connectivity was finally coming to this impossible valley, the very infrastructure of their survival was being systematically dismantled. We are looking at a civilization that survived every empire, from the Mongols to the British, by being unreachable, now being forced into a sunlight they never asked for. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. The outside world views Zanskar as a tragedy of geography. They see a valley, locked behind Himalayan ridges, situated 4,000 meters above the oxygen line, and they assume the people are victims of a cruel landscape. This is the first layer of the deception. Zanskar was not a prison, it was a fortress. In the 15th century, while the rest of the world was busy with the expansion of empires and the drawing of colonial borders, the people of this valley were perfecting the art of being invisible. They did not settle here because they lacked better options. They settled here because the mountains provided something no fertile plain could offer: total, uncompromised autonomy. They carved irrigation channels directly into vertical rock faces. They built monasteries like Fugtol, honeycombed into cliffs so steep that no invading army could ever hope to scale them. This was a civilizational choice. By existing in a place the rest of the world declared uninhabitable, the Zanskaris ensured that no tax collector, no general, and no foreign ideology could reach them without the mountain's permission. For 6 months of every year, the heavy snowfall sealed the passes, turning the valley into a sovereign ark. Inside this silence, they preserved a culture that remained untouched, while the world outside burned, shifted, and erased itself. The isolation was the security. The cold was the shield. But when you build a world that depends on being unreachable, what happens when the very gatekeepers of your survival, the glaciers and the ice, are no longer under your control? The investigation shifts here, from a story of survival to a story of a deliberate breach. The world knows the Chadar as a luxury adventure, a $2,400 trek for those who want to test their grit against the cold. But to a father in Padum, the ice is not a challenge. It is a desperate, 90-mile gamble with his children's lives. When the schools in Leh reopen in the dead of winter, the only way to get a child to a classroom is to walk on water. This is the reality the tourism brochures sanitize. Men carry 5-year-olds on their backs, navigating a sheet of ice that groans and shifts over a freezing torrent. At -40 degrees, the margin for error is 0. If the ice breaks, the river claims you. If the snow falls too heavy, an avalanche dams the gorge and leaves you stranded in a vertical graveyard of rock. Yet, for centuries, the Zanskaris chose this lethal highway over the alternative of ignorance. They paid for their children's future in sweat and frostbite. because the ice was a fair negotiator. It was predictable. It was a law of nature. But that law has been repealed. The turquoise water flowing through the gorge today is a signal that the contract between the people and the land has been broken. While New Delhi celebrates the construction of new military roads through these sensitive heights, the ancestral infrastructure of the Zanskaris is collapsing. This is the central question of our investigation. Why is the world's most extreme civilization being forced to trade its 1,000-year-old security for a road that serves a war they didn't start? We are not just looking at a changing climate. We are looking at the final moments of a world that was never meant to be found, and the people who are being told that their erasure is the price of progress. The ice road is gone. The ark is open. And what we found inside is a truth that was never supposed to reach your screen. Look at a map of the Indian subcontinent, and you will find a void where the logic of modern settlement fails. Most civilizations throughout history followed the pull of gravity, gathering in the fertile warmth of river basins and lowlands. But the Zanskaris did the opposite. They climbed. They retreated into a vertical dead zone, 4,000 meters above the sea, a high-altitude plateau enclosed by the Great Himalayan and Zanskar ranges. To the untrained eye, this looks like a mistake of history, a group of people who simply got lost in the rock. But the geography itself suggests a far more calculated motive. This is a landscape where the air is 30% thinner than at sea level, where the UV radiation is relentless, and where the growing season is a frantic 90-day scramble against the frost. You do not end up here by accident. You come here because you are running from something even more dangerous than the cold. Mainstream history books often frame remote communities as victims of their environment, as if they were trapped by a lack of better options. In Zanskar, the evidence points to a deliberate inversion of that theory. The mountains were not a barrier to their progress. They were the primary engine of their survival. This is the first investigative layer we must peel back. The realization that for 14 centuries, this valley functioned as a sovereign laboratory for human endurance, specifically designed to be ignored by anyone who valued their own comfort. The history of the Himalayas is a history of passing armies. From the Mongol horsemen to the Dogra conquerors, the lowlands were constantly being reshaped by the violent whims of empires. But as those armies moved through the mountain passes, they almost always bypassed Zanskar. The reason was simple. The cost of conquest was too high. There was no gold here, no lush forests to exploit, and no strategic advantage that justified the loss of life required to scale these ridges. The Zanskaris understood this perfectly. By choosing a life on the edge of the survivability limit, they achieved a strategic silence that lasted for a millennium. They were voluntary outcasts who traded the oxygen of the valleys for the autonomy of the peaks. While neighboring regions were being forced into the tax cycles and conscription lines of foreign kings, the people of the Zanskar Valley were governed by their own village councils and the quiet authority of their monasteries. This was not a life of primitive isolation, it was a sophisticated political maneuver. They built a civilization that was intentionally too difficult to govern from the outside. They recognized that in the eyes of a conqueror, a place that offers nothing but struggle is a place not worth holding. This choice allowed them to preserve a Buddhist lineage and a social structure that remained unchanged, while the world below was repeatedly torn apart and stitched back together by those seeking power. Living at 4,000 meters changes the very chemistry of a human being. Your heart becomes larger, your blood thickens, and your relationship with the physical world becomes one of constant negotiation with the elements. For the Zanskaris, this extreme physiology was the price of their freedom. The mainstream narrative suggests that these people were left behind by the march of modernity, as if they were waiting in a waiting room for the rest of the world to find them. But the reality is that they were leading the world in a different kind of progress, the mastery of a closed-loop existence. They engineered irrigation systems that diverted glacial meltwater through miles of solid rock to turn dust into barley. They designed stone architecture that trapped the sun's heat during the day and released it through the sub-zero nights. Every facet of their daily life was a rejection of the idea that they needed anything from the world outside their mountain walls. This autonomy was not born of spite, but of necessity. When you live in a place where the mountains can seal you in for half a year without warning, you cannot afford to depend on a central government thousands of miles away. You become your own government. You become your own doctor, your own engineer, and your own judge. The poverty that outsiders see when they look at these villages is a failure of perspective. They are seeing a lack of consumer goods, while ignoring the presence of a total, uncompromised self-reliance that most modern citizens will never experience. The Himalayan wall is a gate that only opens on its own terms. For 1,000 years, the Zanskaris accepted the terms of that gate. In exchange for protection from the chaos of the world, they would endure winters that could freeze the breath in their lungs. This was the moral weight of their existence. They knew that their security was tied directly to their isolation. If the mountains ever became easy to cross, the sanctuary would vanish. This is why the recent failure of the ice and the arrival of military roads represents more than just a change in transit. It is a breach of the fundamental contract that has sustained this civilization since the 8th century. The environment is no longer acting as the ultimate protector. Instead, it is being turned into a vulnerability. The very glaciers that provided their water and the ice that provided their winter highway are now being monitored and manipulated by external forces. The gate is being kicked open from the outside. As we move deeper into this investigation, we have to confront the uncomfortable truth that the connectivity being forced upon Zanskar is not for the benefit of the people who live there. It is the final stage of a conquest that was delayed for 1,400 years simply because the geography was too difficult. The world didn't forget Zanskar, it just waited until it had the technology to destroy the silence that made Zanskar possible. To understand the survival of Zanskar, we must first look at the soil. It is a high-altitude desert, receiving almost no rainfall, where the ground is a mix of granite dust and ancient silt. To grow enough barley to feed a kingdom at 4,000 meters, you cannot wait for the sky to provide. You must negotiate with the ice. The Zanskaris engineered an irrigation network that defies the laws of standard mountain hydrology. They didn't just dig ditches, they calculated the precise melt rate of glaciers located hundreds of meters above their fields. Using only hand tools and an intuitive understanding of thermal expansion, they carved channels through kilometers of shifting scree and solid rock. These aqueducts are held together by gravity and a communal pact. If a single stone shifts, the water stops and the village dies. This is not agriculture, it is a form of environmental alchemy. They turned a landscape that wants to be dead into a garden of extreme resilience. Every drop of water is tracked and accounted for through a sophisticated system of traditional water-sharing rights that has functioned without a central bureaucracy for centuries. This investigative layer reveals a critical truth. The people of Zanskar did not just live in this environment, they re-engineered it to serve a human purpose that the rest of the world considered impossible. The physical manifestation of this engineering can be found at Fugtul. It is a monastery that should not exist. Built into the mouth of a massive cave on a sheer limestone cliff, it looks like a biological growth rather than a human construction. There are no roads leading here. There were no cranes or heavy machinery used to lift the timber and stone into place. Every beam was carried by hand across the river gorge. The monks who built it 2,500 years ago were not looking for a scenic view. They were looking for a location that demanded a total physical and mental commitment just to reach it. They honeycombed the rock with cells for meditation, creating a vertical village that remains one of the last places on Earth where the traditional Tibetan way of life is practiced exactly as it was before the invention of the engine. The architecture of Phugtal is a silent witness to the priorities of this civilization. It tells us that they valued the preservation of knowledge and the discipline of isolation above the convenience of the lowlands. When you look at the way the structures cling to the cliffside, you realize that the Zanskaris didn't see the mountains as an obstacle. They saw the rock as a partner in a long-term project of cultural survival. This was the original off-grid existence, perfected 2 millennia before the term was invented. In a world where the mountains can seal every exit for 6 months, selfishness is a death sentence. To survive the Himalayan winter, the Zanskaris developed a social code known as radical hospitality. It is not a gesture of politeness. It is a mechanical necessity of the landscape. If a traveler knocks on a door in the middle of a blizzard, the door must open. There is no question of payment or identity. You provide a bed and a bowl of butter tea because you know that tomorrow you could be the one standing in the snow. This law of the open door created a social cohesion that is virtually unknown in the connected world. Because the population was finite and the resources were locked inside the valley, every human interaction carried the weight of long-term survival. You could not afford a feud with a neighbor when that neighbor is the only one who can help you clear an avalanche from your roof. This social engineering is as precise as their irrigation channels. It is a system designed to prevent the collapse of the collective under the pressure of extreme isolation. The investigation here uncovers a disturbing irony. The modern world, with all its connectivity, has lost the very communal interdependence that allowed the Zanskaris to thrive in a place that should have killed them 14 centuries ago. The stone walls and the social pacts are two halves of the same arc, and both are now showing signs of structural failure. For over 1,000 years, the physical difficulty of reaching Zanskar acted as a filter. It ensured that only those who respected the rules of the valley could enter. But as the Nimupadum Dacha road cuts its way through the rock, that filter is being removed. The engineering of the road is not designed to respect the irrigation channels or the cliffside monasteries. It is designed for the rapid movement of military hardware and heavy logistics. We are seeing a clash between two types of architecture. One is built to endure for millennia by working with the geography, and the other is built to dominate the geography for a few decades of geopolitical advantage. The fragility of Zanskar lies in the fact that its survival depended on a silence that is now being shattered by the roar of construction blasting. The radical hospitality that once saved lives is being strained by an influx of outsiders who do not understand the reciprocal nature of the valley's laws. This is the moment where the investigation turns toward the human cost of opening the Ark. We are witnessing the dismantling of a 1,400-year-old proof of concept, and the people of the valley are being forced to watch as the very stone they carved into a home is turned into a highway for their own erasure. To the external world, the frozen Zanskar River is marketed as a pinnacle of adventure, a high-stakes endurance test for the global elite. But for the people of this valley, the ice was never about adrenaline. It was about logistics. For centuries, the Chadar served as the only functional artery for the movement of survival commodities. In the deep winter, when every mountain pass was choked by meters of snow, the river became a highway of butter and salt. Butter was not just a food source. It was the currency of the plateau, used for trade, for lighting lamps in the monasteries, and for maintaining the communal bond. The sub-zero temperatures acted as a natural preservative, allowing the Zanskaris to transport these perishable goods to markets in Leh that were otherwise unreachable. This was infrastructure in its most raw, biological form. There were no maintenance crews or safety barriers. The efficiency of the route was dictated entirely by the physics of the freeze. This investigative layer reveals the distortion of the modern perspective. What the outsider calls a trek, the local calls a supply chain. To deconstruct the Chadar is to understand that the civilization of Zanskar did not survive despite the ice, but because of it. It was a seasonal bridge that allowed them to participate in the world's economy without being consumed by its politics. The most profound evidence of the Chadar's utility is not found in the movement of goods, but in the movement of children. Every winter, as the schools 90 miles away in Leh prepared to reopen, the valley witnessed a mass migration that challenges the modern definition of parenting. Fathers would hoist 5-year-olds onto their backs, wrapping them in wool and hope, and begin a multi-day journey across the groaning river. This was the only way to ensure a child received an education beyond the village level. It was a 90-mile classroom where the curriculum was survival. These men were not looking for a record-breaking feat. They were fulfilling a basic civic duty in a landscape that demanded a staggering physical tax for the right to learn. The investigation into these journeys exposes the moral weight of the Zanskaris' choice. They were willing to walk on a shifting floor of ice, sleeping in caves and navigating wind chills that can stop a heart just to bridge the gap between their isolated heritage and the modern world. This was not a primitive act, but a highly sophisticated investment in the future. The children who grew up being carried across the ice are the same people now fighting for the survival of their culture, carrying the physical memory of the river in their bones. The physics of the Chadar is a study in calculated instability. The river ice is never a static sheet. It is a living, breathing entity that can change its consistency in an hour. Heavy snowfall in the upper reaches of the Himalaya can trigger massive avalanches that temporarily dam the river's flow. When these dams inevitably burst, they release a surge of water that can shatter kilometers of ice in seconds, leaving travelers stranded on high rock ledges with no way forward and no way back. In these moments, the valley becomes a true vertical prison. There is no rescue team coming. There is no satellite communication that can change the reality of the freezing water below. The investigation of the river's behavior reveals why the Zanskaris developed such a precise internal radar for the environment. They learned to listen to the voice of the ice, the specific frequency of the cracks, and the color of the turquoise flow beneath. To survive the Chadar, you had to become an expert in the hydrology of disaster. The high-altitude isolation meant that every group on the ice was its own emergency room, its own search and rescue unit. This was the price of 1,000 years of autonomy, a total, unyielding responsibility for the lives of your fellow travelers on a road that could disappear at any moment. The ice functioned as more than just a physical road. It was a cultural filter that reset the valley every 6 months. This is the shutter effect of the Himalayan winter. For half of every year, the freeze blocked the entry of foreign ideologies, commercial influences, and the noise of the outside world. It allowed the Zanskaris to retreat into their own social and spiritual rhythms, ensuring that their culture remained unpolluted by the rapid shifts of the lowlands. This isolation was a protective layer that allowed their Buddhist traditions to remain in a state of deep preservation, while similar cultures across the border were being dismantled. The investigation into the Chadar must acknowledge that the ice was the primary guardian of Zanskar's identity. It was a gate that only the most committed could pass through. By making the valley difficult to reach, the ice ensured that the only people who entered were those who were willing to adapt to the valley's laws. Now that the ice is failing to form and the roads are being blasted through the rock, that filter has been removed. The shutter is stuck open. The cultural reset that once happened every winter is being replaced by a permanent 24-hour exposure to the forces of global homogenization, and the results are proving more lethal to the civilization than the cold ever was. In August 2019, the geopolitical landscape of the high Himalaya was permanently altered not by a tectonic shift, but by a legal one. The revocation of Article 370 by the central government dissolved the state of Jammu and Kashmir, stripping away the semi-autonomous status that had, for decades, provided a thin layer of protection for Ladakh and its sub-regions. Overnight, Zanskar was transitioned from a part of a state with its own constitution and land rights into a union territory administered directly from New Delhi. On paper, the move was framed as a path toward integration and development. In reality, it created a profound power vacuum. The local mechanisms that had allowed village councils and monastic leaders to influence the destiny of their land were effectively silenced. The people of the valley woke up to find that the legal barriers preventing outside exploitation of their ecologically sensitive terrain had evaporated. This was the first stage of the silent erasure, a bureaucratic maneuver that treated a millennium-old civilization as a blank space on a map, ready to be reorganized according to the priorities of a capital city located thousands of miles away. The investigation into this shift reveals a disturbing lack of local consultation. A world that had governed itself through winters that could kill was suddenly told it was no longer fit to hold its own keys. The distance between a climate-controlled office in New Delhi and a stone house in Padum is not measured in miles, but in a fundamental disconnect of reality. The administrators now making the decisions for Zanskar have never walked 90 miles on a frozen river. They have never felt the physical weight of a winter that seals every exit for half a year. Yet, they are the ones drafting the infrastructure projects and the land use policies that will dictate the future of the valley. This is a critical investigative point. When the power to govern a landscape is transferred to people who do not have to live with the consequences of their decisions, the landscape becomes an abstraction. To a bureaucrat, a glacier is a water resource to be managed. To a Zanskari, that glacier is a living ancestor whose retreat means the end of their village. The removal of local legislative power means that the people who possess the most sophisticated understanding of this environment are now the ones with the least amount of legal authority over it. We are seeing the imposition of a lowland logic onto a high-altitude world, a process that treats the hard-won wisdom of 14 centuries as an obstacle to be cleared rather than a blueprint to be followed. The true impact of this reorganization is found in the loss of the local voice. Before 2019, the constitutional safeguards of the region acted as a shield against the rapid, unregulated expansion of industries that could devastate the fragile Himalayan ecosystem. Now, those shields are gone. Promises of a new governance structure under the 6th schedule, which would grant tribal communities constitutional land and cultural protections, remain unfulfilled years after the transition. This has left Zanskar in a state of legal limbo. Without an elected legislature or formal mechanisms to refuse large-scale development, the valley has become a territory to be managed rather than a community to be respected. The investigation into the current administrative files shows an acceleration of projects that the local people have virtually no power to stop. This erasure of the local voice is the primary tool of modern colonization. You do not need to send an army if you can simply remove the legal right of a people to say no to their own destruction. The people who guarded the glaciers for a millennium are now spectators in the reorganization of their own home, watching as the legal framework of their survival is dismantled by people who see the mountains only as a strategic asset. The reorganization of Ladakh was not merely an administrative cleanup, it was a silent annexation of a cultural arc for geopolitical ends. Zanskar sits in one of the most contested regions on Earth, flanked by the volatile borders of Pakistan and China. In the eyes of the central government, the priority is not the preservation of a 14th century Buddhist lineage, but the securing of a strategic corridor. By converting the region into a Union territory, the state gained the ability to fast-track military infrastructure without the friction of local environmental laws or communal land rights. This is the hidden architecture of the 2019 decision, the conversion of a sovereign sanctuary into a frontline asset. The valley's isolation, which once served as its greatest protection, is now being treated as a logistical problem to be solved through massive blasting and road construction. This investigation forces us to confront the moral cost of national security. When a country decides that a border is more important than the civilization living on it, the result is the systematic erasure of everything that made that place unique. Zanskar is being opened not for its people, but for the machinery of war, and the people who live there are being asked to accept the death of their silence as the price of a security that was never intended for them. The soundscape of the Zanskar Gorge, once defined by the rhythmic groaning of moving ice and the silence of the high peaks, is now dominated by the shockwaves of industrial explosives. Under the banner of Project Yojak, the Border Roads organization is systematically carving a scar through the limestone heart of the valley. This is not the careful, manual masonry that built Phugtol. This is a campaign of environmental violence. By blasting the very rock walls that historically supported the winter ice, the construction crews are physically truncating the ancestral corridor. In 2024, the Chadar route was shortened and redirected because the gorge itself was being demolished to accommodate the new road. The investigation into these construction sites reveals a total disregard for the geological stability of the canyon. The debris from the blasting is being pushed directly into the river, altering the flow and making the formation of stable ice even more unlikely. What is being lost is not just a path, but the integrity of a landscape that took millions of years to form and 14 centuries to master. We are witnessing the forced modernization of a sanctuary, where the rubble of the past is being used as the foundation for a future the people never requested. If you look at the technical specifications of the Nemu Padam Dacha Road, the official narrative of a civilian lifeline begins to fracture. A road built for a community of 14,000 people would not require this level of reinforcement or these specific gradients. This is a highway engineered for the movement of T-90 tanks and heavy artillery convoys. It is a strategic alternative to the existing routes that are vulnerable to observation and fire from the contested borders. The investigation into the road's design proves that the Zanskaris are a secondary consideration in a much larger geopolitical chess match. The road bypasses traditional village centers, focusing instead on maintaining a high-speed link between military hubs. This is the logistics of the front line, disguised as public works. By placing a heavy-duty military artery through the center of a sovereign culture, the state is effectively converting the valley into a permanent garrison. The people are not being given a way to reach the world. The world is being given a way to move through their home without stopping. The asphalt is not a bridge to opportunity, but a conveyor belt for the machinery of a border war that treats the Zanskar Valley as a tactical coordinate rather than a living civilization. The government's use of the word lifeline is a masterful piece of political branding that collapses under scrutiny. While the road is promised as a year-round solution to the valley's isolation, there is no evidence of a sustainable plan to manage the extreme environmental realities of the region. The high-altitude passes remain prone to massive snow accumulation and avalanches that no amount of asphalt can solve without constant, multi-billion-dollar maintenance. This investigation uncovers the deception at the heart of the connectivity promise. The road provides the illusion of access during the summer months when the valley was already accessible, but it offers no real guarantee of safety when the winter truly settles in. Instead of investing in local healthcare or decentralized education that would allow the Zanskaris to thrive in their own environment, the state has invested in a single, vulnerable thread of pavement. This is not development, it is a form of dependency. By destroying the self-reliant infrastructure of the ice and the ancient trails, the state has forced the people to rely on a government-maintained road that can be closed at the whim of a military commander or a budget cut. The lifeline is actually a leash, ensuring that the survival of the valley is now entirely dependent on the very power structure that is dismantling its heritage. The arrival of the road marks the strategic erasure of the silence that allowed Zanskar to exist as an independent cultural arc for over a millennium. For 14 centuries, the difficulty of the journey acted as a filter, ensuring that only those who could survive the valley's terms were allowed to influence it. That filter has been smashed. The road is a tool of cultural and geopolitical colonization that permanently ends the valley's status as a sovereign sanctuary. With the trucks and the tanks comes the noise of a global homogenization that the ice once kept at bay. The investigation reveals that the road is the final stage of a conquest that the mountains once prevented. It is the physical manifestation of a paradigm shift where the land is no longer seen as a sacred home to be guarded, but as a territory to be exploited and controlled. The Zanskaris are being told that they are finally being integrated into the modern world. But the reality is that their unique proof of human resilience is being paved over. The road does not just lead into the valley, it leads away from everything that made Zanskar a singular miracle of human history. Once the asphalt is dry, there is no path back to the autonomy that was forged in the cold, and the silence that protected this world for 1,000 years will be gone forever. The primary engine of the Zanskar Valley is not the river, but the massive, ancient ice of the Pakachik Glacier. For 14 centuries, this glacier acted as a biological bank account, releasing water in a measured, predictable flow that matched the needs of the barley fields below. But the data from the 2026 winter reconnaissance reveals a catastrophic acceleration in the melt rate. While the historical average retreat was measured in a few meters per year, the glacier is now collapsing at a rate of nearly 20 meters annually. This is not a gradual change, it is a structural failure of the high-altitude ecosystem. The investigation into the 2026 warming spike shows that the Western Himalayas are experiencing temperatures far beyond the historical norm, preventing the nighttime refreeze that is essential for glacial health. As the giant retreats, it leaves behind a landscape of unstable rock and sediment, signaling the end of the hydrological stability that allowed a civilization to exist here. The Zanskaris are witnessing the death of their primary provider, and for the first time in 1,000 years, the bank is running out of capital. There is a deceptive phenomenon in glacial hydrology known as peak water. As a glacier dies, the river runoff actually increases for a short period because the ice is melting faster than it can be replenished. This creates a false sense of security in the valleys below. To an administrator in a distant city, the rivers look full, the irrigation channels are flowing, and the crisis feels abstract. But this investigation reveals that we have likely passed the tipping point for the Pakachik system. The current abundance of water is not a sign of health. It is the ghost of a dying giant. Once the core volume of the glacier drops below a certain threshold, the flow will not just taper off, it will vanish. For the people of Zanskar, this means the irrigation systems they carved into the rock will eventually carry nothing but dust. The compensation mechanism of the melt is a countdown, and when the clock hits zero, the ability to sustain human life at 4,000 meters will disappear. The tragedy of peak water is that by the time the shortage is visible to the world, it will be too late to stop the collapse. The implications of the Pakachik's retreat extend far beyond the mountain ridges of Ladakh. The glacial systems of this region feed the Indus, the Zanskar, and the Shyok rivers that form the lifeblood of South Asia. Over 1 billion people downstream depend on the regulated release of this ice for their survival, their agriculture, and their industrial stability. Zanskar is, quite literally, the water tower of Asia. This investigative layer exposes the global stakes of the local erasure we are witnessing. If the tower fails, the resulting water insecurity will trigger a cascade of geopolitical conflicts across one of the most densely populated and nuclear-armed regions on the planet. The world views Zanskar as a remote curiosity, but the health of its ice is a direct indicator of the future stability of the entire continent. We are looking at a planetary emergency disguised as a local climate shift. The death of the Pakachik Glacier is a signal that the environmental foundation of South Asian civilization is being eroded, and yet the international community remains focused on the tourism potential of the valley rather than the biological necessity of its preservation. The most profound injustice of the climate crisis in Zanskar is the exclusion of the people who have served as the silent guardians of the ice for over a millennium. For 1,400 years, the Zanskaris manage their water with a level of precision and communal responsibility that the modern world has never achieved. They lived within the limits of the ice, never taking more than the environment could provide. Now, they are being forced to pay the price for a global industrial surge they did not participate in. This investigation highlights a moral vacuum. The governance structures imposed on Ladakh since 2019 give local communities virtually no legal authority over the national and international policies that are melting their future. They are being asked to watch their landscape dismantled by decisions made in capital cities they cannot influence. The people who know the ice best, who can read its color and hear its shifts, are the ones being silenced in the global conversation about its survival. The erasure of Zanskar is not just about the loss of a culture. It is about the world losing the one group of people who actually knew how to live in harmony with the giant that sustains us all. When the political machinery of a nation-state stops listening to the voices of its citizens, the citizens are forced to use the only asset they have left, their own physical survival. In early 2024, Sonam Wangchuk, an engineer and activist who had spent his life solving the technical problems of the high Himalaya, turned his body into a battlefield. For 21 days, he survived on nothing but water and salt in the sub-zero temperatures of Ladakh. This was not a standard political protest. It was a biological mirror of the glaciers he was trying to protect. As his body consumed itself to stay alive, he was signaling to the world that the Zanskaris were reaching the limit of their endurance. The investigation into this hunger strike reveals a profound desperation. A man who had won international awards for his brilliance was reduced to starving himself in the cold just to get a meeting with the administrators in New Delhi. The symbolism was unmistakable. If the government allowed its most dedicated citizens to waste away for lack of constitutional safeguards, it would surely allow the environment that sustained them to do the same. This moment marked the end of the valley's quiet patience and the beginning of a raw, uncompromising confrontation with the central power. By September 2025, the quiet dignity of the hunger strikes had evolved into something more volatile. The youth of Ladakh and Zanskar, who had grown up watching the ice fail and the roads advance without their consent, took to the streets in numbers that the security forces were unprepared for. The investigation into the 2025 demonstrations reveals a generational breaking point. These young people were not just protesting a policy, they were fighting against the erasure of their future. When sporadic violence erupted, it was the sound of a millennium of repressed anxiety finally reaching the surface. The state responded with the standard tools of modern governance: internet shutdowns and increased police presence, effectively treating its own people as insurgents in their own home. This shift from peaceful meditation to street-level defiance is the most chilling evidence of the moral crisis in the valley. The social cohesion that had been forged inside the isolation of the freeze was being shredded by the pressure of a government that refused to grant them the right to protect their own land. The youth were no longer asking for a seat at the table. They were questioning why the table was being built on the rubble of their heritage. There is a cruel irony in the way the world consumes the tragedy of Zanskar. While the people were starving and protesting for their survival, images of their landscape were being circulated on TikTok and Instagram as a backdrop for spiritual tourism and personal growth narratives. The investigation into this digital void reveals a massive gap between the perception of the outside world and the reality on the ground. To the global viewer, Zanskar is a beautiful abstraction, a place to find oneself before returning to the comfort of the lowlands. But the people living there are not a backdrop. They are individuals facing the literal disappearance of their water and their laws. The digital economy treats their struggle as content, stripping away the political urgency and the historical weight of their demands. This disconnect is a form of secondary erasure. By turning a life-and-death struggle for autonomy into a curated visual experience, the world is participating in the very process that makes the Zanskaris invisible to the people who hold power over them. The investigation proves that visibility without agency is just another form of exploitation, and the TikTok reels of the pristine Himalaya are actually documenting the final moments of a world being killed by the very people who claim to admire it. The resistance in Zanskar has reached its final investigative point, a moral ultimatum that the world can no longer ignore. The people are not asking for more roads, more tourists, or even more development. They are asking for the right to remain human in a landscape that they have understood better than anyone else for 14 centuries. This is not a radical demand, yet it is being treated as one by a state focused on military logistics and national security. The investigation into the hunger strikes and the youth protests reveals that the Zanskaris have reached a conclusion that most modern societies are too afraid to face. That progress is a lie if it requires the destruction of the communal bonds and the environmental integrity that make life worth living. They are holding up a mirror to the rest of the planet, asking if we truly believe that a road for tanks is more valuable than a civilization of radical hospitality and ecological mastery. The ultimatum is simple. Either the world recognizes the sovereign right of these people to exist on their own terms, or it admits that it values the machinery of war more than the human spirit. The Zanskaris have done their part. They have survived the cold for 1,000 years. Now, the question is whether the rest of the humanity is capable of surviving the truth of what we are doing to them. The investigation into the opening of Zanskar must confront the role of the camera. When the BBC's Human Planet broadcast footage of children navigating the lethal ice of the Chadar, it was framed as a celebration of human spirit. To the global audience, it was a window into a world that felt untouched by the complications of modern life. But this visibility functioned as a massive, unintended dinner bell for the global travel industry. Within years, a route that had been a silent corridor for butter and salt was flooded with thousands of international trekkers. The investigation into this shift reveals a catastrophic distortion. The media turned a grueling necessity into a high-stakes performance. The Zanskaris were no longer just walking for their children's education. They were walking through a lens that converted their struggle into a commodity. This human planet effect stripped the valley of its most effective defense, its obscurity. By making the world aware of the Chadar, the media inadvertently created a market for its destruction. The influx of outsiders brought a temporary surge in cash, but it also brought a permanent increase in the cultural and environmental noise that the mountains had spent 14 centuries keeping at bay. The irony of modern exploration is that the more pristine a location is, the more damage is done by the people who travel to see it. International trekkers fly thousands of miles, generating a massive carbon footprint, only to land in a high-altitude desert where every resource is finite. The investigation into the carbon footprint of admiration proves that the very people who claim to value the unspoiled nature of Zanskar are the ones accelerating its thermal collapse. The waste generated by thousands of visitors, from plastic bottles to human excrement, is now being dumped into a landscape that has no industrial processing capacity. More importantly, the heat generated by the increased activity and the supporting infrastructure is contributing to the microclimate shifts that are preventing the river from freezing. We are witnessing a feedback loop of destruction. The fear that the ice will disappear drives more people to see it before it's gone, and the act of seeing it ensures that it disappears even faster. This is the paradox of the global gaze. Our desire to witness the last corners of the earth is the very thing that ensures no corners will remain. The Zanskaris are being asked to provide a backdrop for once-in-a-lifetime experiences, while their own ability to live a lifetime in this valley is being revoked. We are witnessing the final stage of the opening, the conversion of a living, breathing civilization into a museum-style backdrop. The Zanskaris are increasingly being forced to perform their heritage for an audience that views them as characters in a historical drama rather than as contemporary human beings with political rights. This investigation reveals that the tourism industry thrives on a version of Zanskar that is stuck in the past, even as the people are struggling with the very modern problems of water scarcity and political erasure. The spectacle of the dying ark is a profitable one for international agencies, but for the locals, it is a psychological prison. They are expected to maintain the appearance of traditional life to satisfy the expectations of visitors who have paid for a timeless experience, even as the ice fails and the military roads advance. This performance of culture is a secondary form of colonization. It demands that the Zanskaris remain static for the sake of the camera, while the world around them is being dismantled. The investigation proves that once a civilization becomes a spectacle, its survival is no longer in its own hands. It becomes a property of the global audience. And as we have seen with the failed ice of 2026, an audience is rarely interested in the tragedy once the show stops being beautiful. The final investigative finding is that the ice of the Zanskar River did not simply fail to form, it was killed. For 14 centuries, the thermal balance of this gorge was maintained by the shadow of the cliffs and the absence of human heat. But the autopsy of the 2026 freeze reveals that the physical destruction of the canyon walls for Project Yojak altered the wind patterns and allowed sunlight to penetrate areas that had remained in permanent shadow since the last ice age. This was a calculated casualty. The state prioritized the rapid movement of heavy hardware over the integrity of a natural highway that required no maintenance and cost nothing to the environment. We are witnessing the end of a biological miracle, replaced by an unstable thread of asphalt that is already crumbling under the pressure of the very mountains it tried to conquer. The disappearance of the ice is the ultimate proof that our current definition of progress is fundamentally incompatible with the survival of the world's most resilient cultures. The Zanskaris did not lose their way of life to time. It was stripped from them by a series of deliberate engineering choices that valued a strategic border more than a living civilization. The myth that the road brought civilization to Zanskar is the final deception we must dismantle. Civilization was already here. It was in the irrigation systems carved into the granite, the radical hospitality that ensured no one died in a storm, and the monastic libraries that preserved ancient human thought. What the road brought was not civilization, but dependency. It replaced the self-reliant mastery of the ice with a reliance on a distant government that can close the gate at any moment. This is the paradigm shift. A community that once looked to the glaciers for their survival must now look to a bureaucrat in a capital city they have never seen. The investigation proves that the lifeline has effectively severed the connection between the people and their land. By making the valley easier to access, the state has made it impossible to defend. The resilience that allowed the Zanskaris to outlast every empire that passed through the lowlands has been traded for a precarious connectivity that offers no long-term security. The road is not a gift. It is a mechanism of control, ensuring that the last sovereign sanctuary of the Himalaya is now just another managed territory in a world that has no room for autonomy. The final signal from Zanskar is a warning for every remaining sanctuary on the planet. We are living through the era of the Great Closing, where the last pockets of human history that existed outside the global machine are being systematically integrated and erased. The tragedy is that we are the witnesses to this disappearance, yet we are the ones who funded the roads through our taxes and fueled the melt through our consumption. The Zanskaris are the ones who held the line, who proved that humans could live at 4,000 meters without destroying the source of their water. Their erasure is our loss. When the last monk leaves Fugtal and the last father stops walking the ice, we will have lost more than just a culture. We will have lost a unique proof of what it means to be human. The ark is open, and what is inside is being scattered to the winds of a geopolitical struggle that has no memory and no soul. As the silence of the valley is finally replaced by the roar of the machine, we have to ask ourselves what we have gained. The investigation is over, and the conclusion is a heavy, lingering weight. We did not bring the world to Zanskar. We took the world away from it.